All right. Merry Christmas. I got a double take over there. Merry Christmas. Why am I saying that? Because the world is saying that right now. And because of everything we've gone through in this year of 2020, I have heard more than one time, we need a little Christmas right this very minute. People are hauling out the holly. They're putting up the mistletoe. They're putting their trees up. They're decorating. I have seen Christmas lights out already in Sault Ste. Marie. Of course, people move from Halloween to Christmas, and they kind of skip right over Thanksgiving. But I want you to know, just as we sang about the resurrection of Jesus Christ right off the bat here in our worship service, I want you to know that there is never a bad time to celebrate the birth of Christ. There's never a bad time to offer thanks. There's never a bad time to celebrate Jesus' victory over death and over the grave. And it's all because God has a face, and He shows His face to us. In the Old Testament, anyone who thought that they might look at God thought they would surely die. But because of Jesus Christ coming and being part of this world and part of humanity and part of our lives, we can see the face of God. And so this morning's message is God has a face. We're going to be in John chapter 1, along with some other passages that are more familiar to a Christmas story. And this is the first in a series, A Lifetime of Hope. Now, I don't need to tell you that 2020 has been a very rough year. Having dealt with health scares, unemployment, and political battles. Now here come the holidays. And we're exhausted. And we need a break. This year, in November and in December, I'm looking at the entire holiday season. Since March, we have been affected by a pandemic that they call the novel coronavirus or COVID-19. All year long, we have been beleaguered and exhausted by the most divisive presidential campaign I can remember in my lifetime. And really, to answer that, since August, we have been examining weeks' worth of praise and thanksgiving from the book of Psalms. We've already talked about Thanksgiving, and we've talked about Thanksgiving through the end of the summer and now into the fall. In response to what has happened this year, we now need to look at God's gift, and that's the gift of Christ. To counter the emotional toll that we have all experienced in 2020, as I said earlier, I've heard more than one person say that the Christmas tree is going up early. And I've heard people say that they really don't mind seeing the Christmas displays in the stores back in September and in October. I know that people are actually looking for the radio stations that are already playing all Christmas all the time. Colleen and I came back from Marquette, just took a trip to get away a little bit on Friday. And as we were looking at the radio dial and trying to find something, as long as we could hold the station in, there was a Marquette station that was already doing all Christmas all the time. And it didn't sound bad. Sounded pretty good. There are people who are really welcoming the everyday Black Friday specials that are going on because of COVID. And they're looking forward to what's next. You know, people are actually getting excited about the holidays. But all those things are not enough to balance our emotions, to bring some normalcy back into our lives. We still face uncertainties. The spike in COVID-19 cases have health officials warning us to restrict or cancel family gatherings at Thanksgiving and beyond. And so, what do we do at the end of 2020, in November and December, with holidays that we cherish, what do those holidays hold for us? Are we going to muddle through somehow? Now, normally I love the holidays, and I love everything that goes along with them. Max Lucado wrote this. He said, "I love Christmas. Let the sleigh bells ring. Let the carolers sing. The more Santas, the merrier. The more trees, the better. The tinsel and the clatter and the waking up to see what was the matter. Bing and his tunes. Macy's balloons. Mistletoe kisses. Santa Claus wishes. And favorite dishes. Holiday snows. Warm winter clothes. And Rudolph's red nose. I love Christmas." And I can understand what Max Lucado was saying. I maintained a childlike wonder and awe of the Thanksgiving and Christmas seasons well into my adult years. I really wanted to convey that appreciation for these two favorite holidays of mine to my own kids. And that became especially important to me during the 5 years that we lived in Alaska. During the years that we were away from their aunts and their uncles and their cousins, and especially from their grandparents. From the years that they were missing those family gatherings. But at times, my enthusiasm for these holidays backfired. More than once, as young teens, our kids would roll their eyes at Dad's holiday enthusiasm. Just like Clark Griswold in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, I found myself wanting to create the perfect family holiday, but I found out that there were problems. For one thing, our children grew up. And then for another, people moved. Our daughter moved back to Alaska and is 4,000 miles from us. Our son stayed in southern Indiana, and he's 800 miles from us. And for the last 10 Thanksgivings and the last 10 Christmases, Kalita and I have been here as empty nesters in the UP, and we have largely had uneventful holidays. Now, there have been a couple of times when we actually flew to Alaska and celebrated Thanksgiving, or we celebrated Christmas. But I'll tell you why, because our granddaughter was born at Thanksgiving, and our grandson was born at Christmas. And so we had a very special reason for making those trips. But other years, here in the Sioux, we did not even bother to put up a Christmas tree. And can I tell you something? Can I confess something to you? That was something that was unthinkable for someone like me with a Clark Griswold mentality toward Christmas. We didn't put up a tree. We didn't have one up last year. We didn't have family coming. We didn't have people in the house. Now, I can tell you that for many people, the events of 2020 are not adding any luster to these holidays. Where some people are excited and some people want to jump into it whole hog, and they want to get all the decorations up right now. Others would just as soon leave them packed away because Christmas is just another issue they have to deal with. I like this quote. We need to take heart because God is still in his temple. He is still on his throne. And he is still in control. God makes princes out of prisoners. God makes counselors out of the captive. God makes Sundays out of Fridays. Think about Easter. And God brings beauty out of a mess going on in Bethlehem. And so let's talk about the fact that God has a face. And he shows that face to us, especially during the holidays. 3 things I want to draw from this morning. We'll be looking at the scriptures, but there's 3 main thoughts here that I want us to leave with. First, God will lord over chaos. when there's chaos in our lives, when there's upheaval, God is still going to be the one who is Lord. We need to consider Mary. When you think of Mary, the mother of Jesus, she faced the most troublesome challenge of her life up to that point. Now, the real troublesome challenge came some 33 years later when she watched her son die on a cross. But up to this point, as a young woman, as a teenager, engaged to a man who was godly, she found herself pregnant, not by her fiancé. And it really caused some grief. It was a challenge, but it became a glorious surprise. Because when she gave birth to her firstborn son, she gave birth to our celebration of Christmas. God can lord over our chaos. Mary endured many painful difficulties. She faced the social stigma of having an unwed pregnancy. And for that, I just want to turn to what Matthew tells us is Joseph's reaction to the news that Mary was pregnant. Many people are going to face social stigmas. Many people are going to face difficulties. They're going to have to deal with things that aren't right, but it's still part of their lives. And this is what happened with Mary and Joseph. In Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 and 19, Matthew says, "This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law, he did not want to expose her to public disgrace, and so he had in mind to divorce her quietly." Now, she was almost full term when they had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and they traveled either on foot or they traveled with her riding a donkey. By the way, there is nothing in the scriptures that tell us that Mary rode a donkey into Bethlehem the night that Jesus was born. That's how we have interpreted it, because this is what the scriptures say in Luke chapter 2 in verses 4 and 5. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. They hadn't formally been married yet. She was still technically an unwed mother. And yet she went with her fiancé to Bethlehem. Now, why'd they go to Bethlehem? Because of political issues. Because Caesar Augustus in Rome wanted an accounting of the people of Israel so that he could tax them. And so he called for a census. And the best way to conduct a census back in those days was send people back to their ancestral homes. And so Joseph, having been from the line of David, and Mary, also having been from the line of David, traveled to Bethlehem while Mary was 9 months pregnant. Now, she was without family, she was without friends, and she gave birth to Jesus in an animal shelter. She placed her firstborn in a feed trough. That's what a manger is. It was filled with hay. Why was it filled with hay? Because that's where the animals went to eat. They ate out of that trough. And in Luke chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, Luke says, "While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room available for them in the inn." There were no guest rooms anywhere in Bethlehem because of the taxing, because of the census, because of the inconvenience, because of politics. They found themselves in a desperate situation. What an upheaval. No family, no friends, unfamiliar surroundings, unfamiliar noises, no sanitary conditions, less than pleasant smells, a crowded town, and people griping. Is this any way to celebrate? Is this any way to welcome God's Son into the world, to bring the King to glory? Well, no. But sometimes our best laid plans are spoiled by things we can't control. I would suspect that Mary's family and Mary's friends were preparing for her birth and for her having this baby born in Nazareth. I would suspect that they were already in contact with a midwife there. I would suspect that they were already preparing a room for her to have the baby in. And they may have already had a crib for the baby built. Joseph might have built it himself, being a carpenter. But they were in an upheaval and had to go to Bethlehem, had to mess with all this, and yet God's will was still done. Years ago, Max Lucado and his wife, Denilyn, and their family were experiencing one of the most painful Christmases I think any of us could imagine. On Christmas Eve, Max and Denilyn's daughter, Jenna, was in the emergency room dealing with a difficult pregnancy. Ultimately, on Christmas Eve, their daughter lost her baby. And all the delights of Christmas, Max said, were hard reminders of their family's loss. Now, this year of 2020, this uncertainty we have of our future, this separation that we might be enduring from our loved ones, and tragedies like the Lucados faced can make havoc of our holiday plans, or they can cause us to trust the Lord more than ever before. Why? Because God will lord over chaos. Secondly, we need to see from this story of Mary and Joseph and Bethlehem that God understands our struggles. He understands what we're going through. Just like his mother Mary's life, Jesus' life was full of both joyful delights and unspeakable difficulties. Why? So that he could understand. So that we can see that God gets us. He gets us. He knows what's going on. He loves us in spite of the difficulties and in spite of the distress and in spite of the sadness and in spite of the uncertainties. He can help us do the best we can because he has suffered the worst through a scandalous pregnancy, through an imposed census, through an untimely trip, and in an inn that had no room, God triumphed in Mary's story. God understands struggles. And because God became one of us, because Jesus was born, God understands how we feel, and he understands the struggles we face. There was a medical missionary named George Harley. In 1926, he lost his son Bobby to a deadly tropical fever. George had seen very little response in the tribe that he was preaching and teaching with, the tribe that he was giving medical care to. But when his own son died, when Bobby died, an elderly member of the Mano people saw George crying in deep grief at his son's grave. And the elder went back to the people and shouted, white man, he cries like us." And because of George's weeping, and because of George's sorrow, everything changed about his ministry. Thousands from the Mano tribe began responding to the gospel he preached. They were accepting Christ. They were being baptized because they saw that this man who spoke of God was like them and understood their struggles. They saw his tears. And they said, he's worth listening to. So God understands our struggles. But finally, let's get a grip on the fact that God has a human face. He's not some great being somewhere. He's not the man upstairs. No, he has a face. This is what John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14 declares. Some people look at this passage and they don't think Christmas, but this is a Christmas story as well. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, but he came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. Children born not of natural descent or of a human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Do you see what John's telling us? John's telling us that God is not just up there somehow dictating things. He's not just up there drumming his fingers on his desk, trying to decide if he wants to answer our prayers. God has a human face, and that face is Jesus. John Piper said it this way: the Word became flesh and lived among us. Now, to hear the full force of that verse, we have to go back to verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was God, and the Word became flesh. If the Word was God, and the Word became flesh, that means that God became human. God became one of us. Jesus Christ was human, and Jesus Christ was God. The Word became flesh and lived among us. When it says that he lived or he dwelt among us, it means he set up a tent. He set up his tent here. Now, some people would say in setting up a tent, you're setting up a temporary structure. We think of something that we would take on a trip to set up for shelter and then to take down and move on. But when you look at how the word tent or dwelling place is used in the Scriptures, it doesn't imply anything temporary. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 3, we have new heavens and a new earth. They are eternal. They're described in the best way that John could describe them in human understanding. And he said, behold, the dwelling place, the tent of God is with them. He will dwell. He will pitch his tent, and they shall be his people. Pitching a tent means that God wants to be with you. He wants to be on familiar terms with you. He wants to be close. Now, we can pitch a tent in the wilderness to protect us from the elements. Or as kids, we could pitch a tent in our backyard and knowing that mom and dad were just a few steps away. That's the kind of tent that God has with us. He says, I'm going to be that close to you. I will deal with what fears you, with what concerns you. I will be there for you. And so we see the glory of God when Jesus came to dwell among us, to live with us. And it's explained by the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Paul said, for what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let light shine out in the darkness, made this light shine in our hearts to give us the light and the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. God has a face. He has shown us Jesus. And everything we are, all that we have, the light that God gives us is designed to reflect back upon the face of Jesus Christ. And Paul continued in verses 16 through 18 of 2 Corinthians 4. He said, therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Why? Because God's glory is displayed in his face, the face of Jesus. We see Jesus, and we know God cares. For our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. God has a face, and that face is Jesus. This holiday season, as we start rolling into our season of Thanksgiving, as we roll out of that and roll into the Christmas holidays, as we deal with the uncertainties as to how many people we're supposed to be gathering with and what kind of rules we're going to have to face, this holiday season, we need to surrender our lives to the God who has a face and has shown his face to us, to one that we can look to eye to eye. How many remember looking eye to eye with a newborn? Might be your own child, might be your grandchild, it might be a nephew or a niece, it might be a younger cousin. But the first time that you and a newborn actually locked eyes and there was communication. Not a word was said, but there was communication. When we see Jesus, we are communicating with him in a way that the world never has had a chance to before. We will see God himself. We cannot face a crisis until we face God first. So let's go back to what we said earlier. God gets us. He gets us. He understands. He knows us. And he loves us. How does he do it? By becoming one of us. And because he becomes one of us, he offers us a lifetime of hope. Not just to celebrate at a holiday season, but a lifetime of hope to celebrate every day of our lives, every moment that we breathe. And so in these stressful and uncertain times, we need to do what the Hebrew author said in Hebrews chapter 12. We need to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy before him set aside his own glory to become one of us, to have a face, to develop a relationship, to connect with us, and to make all the difference in the world. God has a face. And he wants that face to shine on you. He wants you to reflect him. And so as we begin what is a prolonged holiday season, as we leave a very prolonged political season, we need to seek the face of God through Jesus Christ. And we need to follow. And if you need that kind of assurance and commitment, if you don't want to muddle through Christmas, but you want to celebrate Christmas, would you come to Jesus? And would you know him? He invites you. He asks that you follow him. And we want to show you how. And so if you're outside of Christ, you can come forward as we sing, and you can make a commitment to be one who would rely on the face and the love and the heart of our Lord Jesus Christ.